Okay, Donald Trump had a completely propagandistic 1984-style town hall yesterday. He took questions from Americans via video while sitting at the Lincoln Memorial yesterday. We believed that it was Donald Trump who had selected the Lincoln Memorial as the location. But then during this event, Donald Trump said, oh, no, you guys told, you guys being Fox News, you guys told us you wanted it at the Lincoln Memorial. The two Fox hosts, Brett Baer and Martha McCallum, visibly confused about, wait a second, I thought we were here because you wanted us here. Doesn't even matter. That's only the tip of the iceberg, my friends, because it was an absolute and complete nightmare. Now, because we're doing fewer and fewer of the briefings, I do think it's important to bring you a sense of what the president is communicating. And in relation to our segment earlier today on whether the United States is a failed state of sorts, last night's town hall was more than illuminating in that sense. Now, first of all, Donald Trump came in absolutely shot out of a cannon, like he was on some kind of upper. And we've talked about this before. Trump visibly very sweaty, sniffing, repeating himself more than usual, clenching his jaw, unable to sit still. And, you know, we know about these two versions of Trump. You've got upper Trump and then you've got downer Trump, as I like to call them. Something very strange seems to continue with Donald Trump along those lines. It's tough to analyze, and we may never know the full scope of that. Let's put the sort of appearance aside and focus on the content. What we can more easily analyze was the absolutely debased and abominable things that Donald Trump said, along with the complete and total lack of truth in almost every single answer that Donald Trump gave. It would be hard to do a more dishonest town hall. He also barely answered any of the questions in anything what we would call direct sense. But as we go through this, I want to frame it for you up front. His supporters loved it. His supporters loved it. Before we go into the clips, understand that however you see Donald Trump as a hopefully rational, sensible, thinking person who watches or listens to the David Pakman Show, what you see in these upcoming clips, his followers loved and saw as strong Trump, unwilling to be bullied and pushed around, competent Trump dealing with everything perfectly. That's a really scary reality that we have to come to terms with. Let's get into it. Donald Trump often mentions the 1918 flu. He often calls it the 1917 flu. This was a pandemic from about 100 years ago. It was late 1918 through early summer of 1919. It infected, it's believed, about 500 million. The death rate could have been, the death toll could have been anywhere from 17 million. You hear 50 million, you sometimes hear 100 million, based on the numbers you look at. Trump wildly claims without evidence that the 1917 flu ended World War I prematurely. Check this out.
Right? You remember the Spanish flu. So much has been written about it. Now, of course, it's the hottest. Everybody that writes a book about the Spanish flu, 1917, it killed between 100 and, I guess, 50 to 100 million people. It probably ended the First World War because the soldiers were all getting sick.
Now, this is not true. It's simply not true. The war sort of formally ended with the Treaty of Versailles in June of 1919, but fighting had mostly died down 7 months prior to that. There's no question that there were service members around the world infected with the flu. But this is a crazy thing for Donald Trump to say. No pushback whatsoever from Martha McCallum and Brett Baer. Not to defend them, but almost everything Trump said on this issue was false. So there was a sort of Gish Gallop effect going on. Look that term up if you're not familiar with it. Trump was asked a question about how he was supposedly getting intelligence on the virus really early and he ignored it. And Donald Trump claimed that he wasn't told that the virus might be a thing until January 23rd. I'm going to play the clip for you. Now, remember, we had our first case on January 20th that we know of. We now know it was obviously far earlier because of when the first death happened. But there are two options here when Trump says he was first told this could be a thing on January 23rd. Neither is good. I'll tell them to you after we watch the clip.
Because I did the right thing. I saved hundreds of thousands of lives. Okay. She's asking me the question about intelligence. I have the head of the intelligence agencies here today. And here's the exact thing. And we have it. It's going to be released tomorrow or the next day. But I released it today. On January 23rd, I was told that there could be a virus coming in, but it was of no real import. In other words, it wasn't, oh, we got to do something, we got to do something.
So understand, Trump says he was told January 23 the virus might come in. We had our first case 3 days earlier, okay? We had our first case on January 20th. South Korea had its first case right around the same time as we did, within hours of our first case. They, by January 23rd, were already developing a test and setting up ways to contact trace and isolate people. And Trump is now claiming he was first told this could be coming in 3 days after the first case. Now, there's two options here. One is Trump is just lying, and I believe Trump is lying. Now, his brain may have turned to mayonnaise, and he may not recall that he was being briefed about this in early January. There are reports about briefings in December. There are now some reports, which we have not yet fully corroborated, that suggest in late November this was already being discussed. So Trump could just be lying and saying, I didn't even really hear about this as a serious thing until 3 days after the first case. That is probably a lie. If it's true, it's outrageous that Trump was not seriously warned until 3 days after the first case. It goes against every bit of reporting we have. I believe Trump is lying or has completely lost his memory. Neither is good. Continuing with this disgusting town hall, Donald Trump claims that he has been treated that he has been treated worse than Abraham Lincoln. And hilariously, the person asking the question actually said, why do you sometimes ramble without asking questions that are asked of you by the press? Here is part of Donald Trump's answer.
The question I have is about your manner of presentation. Why do you use descriptive words that could be classified as bullying? And why do you not directly answer the questions asked by the press, but instead speak of past successes and generally ramble? The USA needs you. Please let go of those behaviors that are turning people away from you. Please hold on to your wonderful attributes that make you our great leader and let go of other characteristics that do not serve you.
Good. I think I like that question. I'm not sure, but I think I like that question. I appreciate it. I appreciate the prayers, too, very much. Look, I am greeted with a hostile press, the likes of which no president has ever seen. The closest would be that gentleman right up there. They always said Lincoln. Nobody got treated worse than Lincoln. I believe I am treated worse.
Now, of course, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. Okay, Trump is talking about being treated worse by the press than Lincoln. But again, Trump's delusions of grandeur, treated worse than anyone, including Lincoln, because sometimes the press asks real questions and he never answers them, and they have to ask again. Now, on the death toll, this is really important, and it's actually tragic. Donald Trump is very casually moving the goalposts. For close to a month, Donald Trump has been saying, we're going to have 60,000 deaths thanks to me. Could have had 1.5 million. We could have had 2.2 million. But thanks to me, our death toll is going to be only 60,000. That ship has sailed. We now are already at almost 70,000 deaths in the United States. So Trump has very smoothly talked about, listen, we could lose 80 or 90,000, and that would be terrible. Moving the goalposts, take a look.
That's one of the reasons we're successful. That's one of the, if you call losing 80 or 90,000 people successful, but it's one of the reasons that we're not at that high end of the plane as opposed to the low end of the plane.
That number has changed, Mr. President. You said 50,
it's going up.
60,
No, it's going up.
70,
I used to say 65,000,
80
and now I'm saying 80 or 90, and it goes up, and it goes up rapidly. But it's still going to be, no matter how you look at it, at the very lower end of the plane if we did the shutdown.
Now, this was always the plan. Say some insanely high number that would only happen if he literally did nothing, and then say he gets credit for it being less. Understand a couple of different things. This 1.5 million, 2.2 million, Trump for the first time now floating 2.5 million, that may have been if he literally did nothing. No president could realistically do nothing. So it's an outrageous bar to set to even compare to. But the real dishonesty is that in the last 48 hours, Trump has increased his expected death toll by 50% from 60,000 to 90,000. And the way things are going, it could easily be 100,000 before we know it. But Trump is immune from criticism because, again, without him, it would have been 2 million. He's now for the first time floated 2.5 million if he did nothing. That's a higher number than he's ever mentioned before. This is mere politics for Donald Trump. It's not lives. And one just strange moment during yesterday's town hall was, again, it was a very hopped up Trump who seemed to be clenching and sweating and visibly he was upper Trump. I don't want to say what he was on, if anything, but he was upper Trump. He said that he was asked for Schwabs by a governor. This is just too funny.
We had one governor, Inslee, who's always wanting something. And frankly, he didn't do a very good job on nursing homes, as far as I'm concerned, state of Washington. And he said, we need Schwabs. I said, why don't you get them yourself? But if you can't, we'll get them.
So, okay, Schwabs, a totally lie-riddled propaganda event. A few other notes. Donald Trump said Joe Biden wrote him a letter of apology. That's just not true. Trump once again started talking about hydroxychloroquine and told multiple lies about its efficacy. And Trump continues to say that China is paying for tariffs. I want to take a moment just to explain that. I need everybody in my audience to understand this, and I think most of you do. Trump still doesn't understand how tariffs work. Trump continues to insist we're punishing China by putting tariffs on them, which they are paying us. And sometimes he says it's like a tax on China. Please understand that American companies pay the tariffs. I know I've said this before. I have to keep repeating it because Trump seems to still not understand. If China sells steel for $1,000 a rod, okay, it doesn't matter, whatever amount, $1,000 a ton, and we put a tariff on China, China still sells that steel for $1,000 a ton. But if there's a 15% tariff on it, when an American company buys it, the American company pays China their $1,000 and they pay the government $150 more. American companies pay the tariffs. Now, if you believe that this trade war would work, China could be forced to lower their price and accept a lower price because of the tariff that American companies are paying. It's not happening. It's not happening. Trump still doesn't understand how tariffs work. We are seeing the active and willful dissemination of weaponized propaganda. But the saddest thing is that his followers love it and they see this as a strong performance. We have one option, and it's to remove Trump in November. I hope you'll help me do that. All right, let's do a deep dive into correcting lies. This is difficult in our current political climate. Donald Trump yesterday absolutely collapsed like a house of cards under basic questioning by ABC's David Muir yesterday. Trump was in Arizona, went to a mask factory, didn't wear a mask, total propaganda visit. But in the middle of it, Trump was interviewed by David Muir of ABC. He didn't really do anything special other than be a basic journalist asking Trump specific questions and waiting for an answer. And Trump's disintegration, Trump became aerosolized. Let me put it that way. That was the degree of disintegration. It is really something to behold. I'm going to do something that's a real pain to do, which is I'm going to fact check 3 minutes of a Trump interview. And it's so lie riddled that you will notice it takes a lot longer than 3 minutes to do the fact checking. And as usual, more people hear the lie, very few hear the correction. The correction is more work. This is what we're up against, but let's do it. Let's do it together. Okay. So let's start with David Muir presents Trump with a quote. The quote is one you've probably heard before. Trump said 15 cases are soon going to go to zero. Let's dig in. I'm going to try to fact check so that you can understand how these lies are spread and perpetuated, and they become actually like an alternative truth to Trumpists that they repeat. Let's get into the first question here.
There was one thing you said that perhaps you could clarify. You said this was at the end of February. A full month had gone by. You'd stopped travel from China. And you said of the cases here in the U.S., when you have 15 people and when the 15 within a couple of days is going to go down to zero, that's a pretty good job we've done. Help me understand that moment. Did you really think we were going to have 15 cases in the U.S.?
So let me, I said you would say worse than that. I said one person one time. And it's true. There was a time when we had one person in this country. We knew about it. We worked on it, but we had one person. It mushroomed. The 15 people mushroomed. Other people were coming in also from Europe.
So already we have to think this through. The question was, when you said we have 15 and they're going to go to zero, how did you come up with that? Walk us through how you decided 15 cases were going to go to zero. And Trump says, well, it was true. At one point, we did have only 15 cases. At one point, we did have only one case. That wasn't the question. And one tool that's really important to have when you're trying to parse lies from government officials or anybody is, are they answering the question that was asked? Have they given an answer? And Trump has not. The question was not, did we really only have 15 cases at one point? Of course, right? I mean, we now have 1.2 million official cases. At some point, we had zero. You have to go through the number 15 to get there. There's no question about that. That wasn't the question. The question was, why did you think 15 would go to zero? Trump doesn't answer it. Let's continue. Now Trump pulls out this sad piece of paper he'd been carrying around all day, and it gets very, very gaslit at this point. Take a look.
Don't forget.
But we're at more than 1 million
But
cases
don't forget,
now.
in January, okay, let's talk about cases. You know why you're at 1 million cases? Because we have more testing than anybody else. If we tested as much as these countries down here, okay, who don't do very much testing at all, look at Japan, very little testing. They're at the bottom of the rung. Look at South Korea, gets so much publicity. The president of South Korea is a friend of mine. President Moon, he called up, he said, what you're doing with testing is amazing. If I tested this number of people instead of this number of people, I'd have far fewer. If I see this line goes all the way up, over 7 million tests.
Okay, so the graph that Trump pulls out is a linear graph of the total number of tests that were done. And this is really important to understand because it's one of the key disinformation sources right now. Trump brags, we've tested more than 7 million people. Now, that's true, but this is a country of 331 million people. I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but what matters is per capita testing. The U.S. testing 7 million is different than France testing 7 million because France has a much smaller population, as an example. So when you look at a sampling of testing per capita, you would see that, for example, Iceland, a small country for sure, Iceland is second in the world in testing per capita. They've tested about 150,000 people for every million of population. Now, they don't even have 1 million people. Israel is 13th in the world. They've tested 49,000 people per million. Portugal is 15th. Spain is 20th. Norway is 26th. The United States is 41st in testing per capita. We've tested about 23,000 people for every million people we have. We are ahead of the UK, for example. The UK is 45th. So this is a lie Trump won't stop telling. We are 41st in testing per capita. Let's keep going with the interview.
If I tested down here at 1 million tests, I would have a lot fewer cases, too.
I understand the argument you're making.
But look at your question.
No, but you understand there's a huge disparity between 15 and more than 1 million cases. What was it, an intelligence failure? Where was the breakdown that we didn't know the scope of this?
Look, let me tell you this. I closed the border, if you want to use that term. I banned people from coming into China. There were approximately 40,000 Americans. If you were in my position, you would let them come in. You could ask Ron DeSantis, great governor of Florida. Those people went through quarantine, they went through tests, they went through everything, but they were American citizens. I had to let them come back in. But I came in, and what I did is I said against many people, including Anthony Fauci, who I like very much, including Deborah, who I like very much, the doctors, and many other people.
Again, Trump says he closed the border to China. Now, it's true. That went into effect on February 2nd. But understand, by that point, 45 countries had already closed travel to China. Okay? It's also not an answer to the question. An absolute collapse of a performance by Donald Trump. Here's another portion. Trump has repeatedly used this phrase, the cupboards were bare when I came in. And what that means is Barack Obama left me undersupplied. And Trump has used the term to talk about the military. We've already debunked that. That's not true. And Trump has also applied this to PPE for a pandemic. Here, David Muir asks him, okay, you've used this phrase, the cupboards were bare. What did you do to restock the cupboards? And Trump essentially says, well, I was actually busy with impeachment. Take a look.
You know, you're 3 years into your first term.
Yeah.
You're now applying for the job again. What did you do when you became president to restock those cupboards that you say were bare?
Well, I'll be honest, I have a lot of things going on. We had a lot of people that refused to allow the country to be successful. They wasted a lot of time on Russia. That turned out to be a total hoax. Then they did Ukraine, and that was a total hoax. Then they impeached the President of the United States for absolutely no reason. And we even had 197-0 vote by the Republicans.
Understand, my friends, that one of Donald Trump's main defenses of how he handled coronavirus is I was given a bad situation by Barack Obama and I fixed it. I filled the cupboards. Here he's given an opportunity to say exactly what he did. He could tell us how he filled the cupboards. And he says, well, you know, I was pretty busy with impeachment. I was pretty busy with the Russia probe and all of that stuff. David Muir gives him the opportunity to silence his critics and say exactly what he did to fill the cupboards. And he can't do it. Now, let me tell you the truth. And this is sort of a bigger picture story. The truth is that Barack Obama handed Trump a pandemic response team and Trump disbanded it and bragged about disbanding it in 2018. The truth is Barack Obama handed Trump a pandemic response playbook, 69 pages and color coded. We've looked at the document, very good document. All Trump had to do was follow it, and Trump didn't follow it. That's the truth. And Donald Trump, unable to withstand just basic questioning by ABC's David Muir. So Trump had to stop press briefings because they were doing more harm than good, especially after that bleach injection fiasco. Now Trump is doing an actual sit-down interview with someone other than Fox News, and it goes horribly wrong. Trump has no choice, seemingly, but to just do propaganda roundtables with CEOs because everything else is going horribly wrong. Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany held her second press briefing yesterday. You might remember that Donald Trump's previous press secretary, Stephanie Grisham, held 0.0 press conferences, press briefings during her entire time as press secretary. Kayleigh McEnany did one, I believe it was Friday, and she did one yesterday. Now, in her first one, she famously pledged not to lie to the press. Then she told 4 major lies, 2 related to the Russia investigation, 1 related to ventilators, and 1 related to Michael Flynn. So in about 3 minutes, she broke her pledge not to lie. Yesterday, 12 seconds into the press briefing, she lied by claiming that the U.S. is doing the most testing merely by saying we've done 7 million tests. Of course, as you all know, what matters is per capita in a country of 331 million people. Now, the last time that we covered her press briefings, I pointed out the press corps needs to ask her about that time she went on Fox News in February and said Trump will never allow coronavirus to come to the United States. Here's what she said back in February.
Absolutely. This president will always put America first. He will always protect American citizens. We will not see diseases like the coronavirus come here. We will not see terrorism come here. And isn't that refreshing when contrasting it with the awful presidency of President Obama?
Kayleigh McEnany, thank you so much. Good to see you tonight.
Thank you.
Now, to his credit, Jeff Mason from Reuters yesterday asked her about exactly those comments. Here is how she handled it. She turned to a particular page in her notebook. She knew the question might show up. She was prepared. Here's how she addressed it.
You worked for the campaign, and you made a comment, I believe, on Fox, in which you said President Trump will not allow the coronavirus to come to this country. Given what has happened since then, obviously, would you like to take that back?
Well, first, let me note, I was asked a question on Fox Business about the president's travel restrictions. I noted what was the intent behind those travel restrictions, which is we will not see the coronavirus come here. We will not see terrorism come here, referring to an earlier set of travel restrictions. I guess I would turn the question back on the media and ask similar questions. Does Vox want to take back that they proclaim that the coronavirus would not be a deadly pandemic? Does the Washington Post want to take back that they told Americans to get a grip, the flu is bigger than the coronavirus? Does the Washington Post likewise want to take back that our brains are causing us to exaggerate the threat of the coronavirus? Does the New York Times want to take back that fear of the virus may be spreading faster than the virus itself? Does NPR want to take back that the flu was a much bigger threat than the coronavirus? And finally, once again, the Washington Post, would they like to take back that the government should not respond aggressively to the coronavirus? I'll leave you with those questions, and maybe you'll have some answers. in a few days. Yep.
Haley,
Thank you very much.
You were
What's so funny about this is that she clearly feels like that was a huge mic drop moment where she walks off after turning it back around on the press. It's actually cringeworthy, and the entire thing was cringeworthy. She may not last long because it's getting more and more embarrassing. Now, the Trumpists seem to be liking it. That's what might keep her in the job. She starts the briefing 35 minutes late. It lasts only 25 minutes total. After taking only a few questions, she abruptly walks off after being asked about a completely laughable, ridiculous thing that she said. But the Trumpists love it. Don Jr. tweeted yesterday saying her answer was fire. And a whole bunch of Trumpists are just thrilled with Kayleigh McEnany. So let's analyze her argument. She said Trump won't let coronavirus come to the United States. And she responds by saying, listen, a lot of media outlets said this is not going to be a big deal in the United States. That's a terrible argument. Number one, it's not really an argument. It's actually the tu quoque fallacy, which is the appeal to hypocrisy is another way to say it, which is when you try to discredit your opponent's argument about something you did by pointing out that someone else did the same thing. And that it's fallacious, strictly speaking. How can the media criticize her when they said similar things, supposedly, is the way the argument goes? Now, first of all, when the media was saying this may not be a big deal in the United States, the media was reporting what different medical experts were saying, many of whom were people that were involved with the Trump administration. And so one thing to understand is a lot of the articles she's quoting are articles that are essentially citing the medical experts that the Trump administration picked to say things about coronavirus. That's number one. It's not like the media reports, when you look at independent and foreign experts, were not saying this would be a big deal. In fact, you can look at January and February and find a whole bunch of media reports that are not based on what Trump affiliated medical experts were saying. If you look at foreign countries, if you look at independent agencies in the US, they were saying, we could take actions that would prevent this, but if we don't, it's going to be a disaster. So she's actually wrong about that. And a lot of the reports that she cites were simply saying, here's what someone associated with the administration says is going to happen. She didn't say, here's what an expert says. She simply said, Trump won't allow the virus to come here. So she made a very different type of claim when she went on Fox News and said, Obama's presidency was awful. Trump's not going to allow it to come here. That was not, these are the medical experts alleging that. Now, secondly, none of those media people who were simply reporting what was being said were hired to be Trump's press secretary, right? The question about her competence is a very valid and good question because she was hired to be Trump's press secretary. Some Vox writer who quoted a health expert who may have been wrong or may have been taken out of, or whatever, they are not now speaking for the president. But clearly what she has done is show her hand. She is very much willing to attack the media. She is prepared to attack the media whenever she gets a question she doesn't like, very much like Donald Trump does. That's what we've learned. Make sure you're following The David Pakman Show on Instagram at David Pakman Show. We'll be back very soon. Hey, this is really interesting. There's a few Republican governors who have been ignoring, if not completely abandoning Donald Trump when it comes to dealing with the virus in their states. And their popularity has absolutely exploded. I'm talking mostly about Ohio Republican Governor Mike DeWine. He's done a pretty good job of handling coronavirus from day one, although more recently there are some concerns about the policies he's rolling out. But he's mostly been following health experts and not Donald Trump, and his popularity has soared. We also have been looking at how Maryland Republican Governor Larry Hogan has been dealing with the virus. And then our own governor here in Massachusetts, Charlie Baker, a Republican as well, has been doing a pretty good job. And the reason that we care about this is that the November of 2020 elections are in many ways referendums. It's not referenda. I looked it up. Referendums on Donald Trump. When we look at the Senate race in North Carolina with Republican Tom Tillis, or we look at Martha McSally in Arizona, or you look at Susan Collins in Maine, these are in large part adjudications of the Trump regime. And so far, it's not going particularly well for those Republicans. Many Republicans have been afraid of contradicting or crossing Donald Trump because they're afraid It might be bad for their local and state races. Trump might target me. It could be really, really bad. But what we're seeing is that Ohio Republican Governor Mike DeWine has absolutely split from Trump, and he is hugely benefiting from it in terms of approval, in terms of popularity. And this may be a signal for 2020. 6 months away, we can't say for sure, but it may be a signal. What did Mike DeWine do? Mike DeWine locked down Ohio early, before other Republicans took it seriously, before Donald Trump was even taking it seriously. He's been doing regular briefings that are actually fact-based, and they attract Democrats and Republicans in Ohio, and even nationally, people are watching these, much like Andrew Cuomo's briefings. Conservative activists and business leaders have been pressuring DeWine to do what Trump wants, start reopening, do all this stuff. And DeWine just hasn't done it, and he's been listening to the health experts. He also came out in favor of a mail-in primary late last month. Trump has been viciously opposed to mail-in voting. And then more recently this week, DeWine has started to loosen up some of the guidelines as businesses can start opening. Masks are recommended. 6 feet separation is recommended for workers and customers. And for a while before this, 30 or more Republicans in the state legislature were demanding that DeWine open everything right away. And he didn't do it. Splitting with Trump, and his approval on coronavirus is 85%. His trustworthiness rating is 89% on coronavirus. You don't get those numbers with just Republicans. He's taking testing seriously. He says they're going to roughly triple testing by the end of the month in Ohio, from 7,000 a day to 20,000 a day. And what's interesting is that when we look at Maryland and Massachusetts, Republican governors in blue states, you kind of have to, as a Republican governor, follow what your liberal state legislatures want you to do. Massachusetts has a Republican governor in Charlie Baker, but a very left legislature and a relatively left voting public. So it's not surprising that Charlie Baker is doing more what our state wants rather than what Trump wants. But Ohio, it's certainly a battleground state, but it's not a left-wing stronghold of any kind. So you might imagine that what Mike DeWine has done in abandoning Trump would be far more risky, but it has worked. Here in Massachusetts, Charlie Baker, former CEO of a big health insurance company, I didn't vote for him. I'm not looking to have more and more governors be former CEOs of health insurance companies. But Charlie Baker knows how to delegate, he knows how to trust experts, and he knows how to look at data. Remember that Dr. Birx laughably claimed that Trump looks at data and makes decisions by assimilating the information. We all knew it was BS. What we want to see is governors actually do what DeWine has been doing, to some degree what Charlie Baker and Hogan have been doing. I'm hopeful that as a result, on May 18th here in Massachusetts, Charlie Baker will be able to announce some loosening of certain guidelines if the numbers keep improving. Yesterday here in Massachusetts, we had only 1.4% case growth. That's really low. We had a week of about 3% daily case growth. That's really not bad. So competence is important. Ideology is less important here. Armed protesters aside, for the most part, we've seen people across the country approve of competence even across party lines. Massachusetts voters overwhelmingly pleased with Republican Charlie Baker despite being a blue state. Ohio voters, Democrats and Republicans, nearly 90% approval on coronavirus trustworthiness for the Republican governor, who has abandoned the doctrine of Donald Trump. Again, this may be a big signal for how November of 2020 may go. Hopefully, we don't know. We've got to count every single vote. We have to cast every ballot, but that is the upside to what we are seeing. We'll have continued coverage of this on the David Pakman Show Instagram page, at David Pakman Show. Follow me while you're there at david.pakman2. We are in a 100-year global pandemic, and our president is dramatically mishandling it. So I do want to keep you apprised as to what he's been up to for the last 72 or so hours. Donald Trump spent the weekend at Camp David, did a Fox News virtual town hall on Sunday night, and then he basically took yesterday off. If you look at Donald Trump's schedule for Monday, you find nothing on it. And yet yesterday was a really big day in a sense. We are fighting coronavirus. We learned of documents from the CDC and FEMA. Told you about the documents earlier. They predict that we will spike to 3,000 American deaths a day by June 1st. Hopefully not true, but certainly something to be taken very seriously. We found out states are rapidly running out of unemployment money. We found out that states without enough social distancing are starting to see large spikes in cases on a percentage basis. The numbers may still be relatively small, but percentage wise, you are seeing sometimes the case growth double from one day to the next. So we learned last week that even when Trump does do work, he often is showing up at noon after watching TV for 5 to 7 hours a day and sending out outrageous tweets. Yesterday was a clear schedule, except for nearly 24 hours of rage tweeting. 6 a.m. to 1 a.m. OK, I mean, we're talking about 19 hours of tweeting here, all day and night spent tweeting outrageous attacks and untruths, starting with attacks on the press bright and early, saying, quote, Concast, as he calls Comcast, should open up a long overdue Florida cold case against psycho Joe Scarborough. I know him and crazy Mika well, used them beautifully in the last election, dumped them nicely, and will state on the record that he is nuts besides bad ratings. So attack on MSNBC, attack on two specific journalists, media people, Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski. 3 attacks. It's like 6:30 in the morning. Then Trump goes directly into talking about his coronavirus ratings, another obsession, saying, quote, getting great reviews finally for how well we are handling the pandemic, especially our strong production of desperately needed ventilators, the building of field hospitals and beds, and soon the great things we are doing on testing. People are really working well together. Understand that 1,200 people died on Sunday. Another bunch died yesterday. And Trump is tweeting about reviews, ratings, and getting credit. This is a very sick person. This is an acutely unwell individual. Trump bragging then about something which actually has been a huge accomplishment for him, which is one of the main reasons that it's an emergency to remove him in November, which is judges. Donald Trump tweeted yesterday, Republicans love the biggest tax cuts, rebuilt military, choice for vets, which was an Obama program, by the way, saving Second Amendment, and many other things my administration has done. But what they love beyond all else is 252 so far federal judges, not including 2 great Supreme Court justices, a big record. Trump is right. Trump, in collusion with Mitch McConnell, have put in place judges, hundreds of judges who will decide law and cases for your children and grandchildren in some cases. That is how long they are going to be in power. He is right about this one, and he must be stopped. Then Trump attacking California, saying Mexico is sadly experiencing very big virus problems, and now California, get this, doesn't want people coming over the southern border. A classic. They are so lucky that I am their president. Border is very tight, and the wall is rapidly being built. So to date, to this point of the day, he's attacked MSNBC, Joe Scarborough, Mika Brzezinski, and California, as well as bragging about ratings. Then Trump again bragging about testing, a favorite topic. And if Trump is talking about testing, you know he's lying. He said, quote, by Congress not wanting the special 5-minute testing apparatus, they are saying that they are not essential. In any event, we have great testing capacity and have performed 6.5 million tests, which is more than every country in the world combined. Remember, we have the receipts. The United States is currently 41st in testing per capita globally. We're behind Canada, but we're ahead of Belarus. We have 331 million people. Testing 6 million means that after 2 months of this, we've only tested 2% of the population. What matters is our testing rate, not the number of tests. We are 41st in the world. Our death rate, on the other hand, is the 14th highest death rate in the world. Don't take my word for it. Go look up the numbers. Then later last night, Trump attacking MSNBC again, but also CNN, tweeting, MSDNC and fake news CNN are going wild trying to protect China. And then this was really late last night. It was like 1 a.m. But it's so insane, I'm going to count it. Trump very triggered by a new political ad against him with a multi-tweet rant. Get a load of this. Trump saying, this is rage from a president in the middle of the night. It is very acutely unwell It's a sign of Trump being ill, saying, quote, a group of rhino Republicans who failed badly 12 years ago, then again 8 years ago, and then got badly beaten by me, a political first-timer 4 years ago, have copied, no imagination, the concept of an ad from Ronald Reagan, Morning in America, doing everything possible to get even for all of their many failures. You see, these loser types don't care about 252 new federal judges, 2 great Supreme Court justices, a rebuilt military, a protected Second Amendment, biggest ever tax and regulation cuts, and much more. I didn't use any of them because they don't know how to win. And their so-called Lincoln Project is a disgrace to Honest Abe. I don't know what Kellyanne did to her deranged loser of a husband, Moonface, but it must have been really bad. John Weaver lost big for Kasich to me. Crazed Rick Wilson, who's been on this show, lost for Evan McMullen to me. Steve Schmidt and Reed Galvin lost for John McCain. Romney's campaign manager lost to Big O. And Jennifer Horn got thrown out of the New Hampshire Republican Party. They're all losers, but Abe Lincoln, Republican, is all smiles. The unintelligible rantings of a lunatic, a triggered lunatic. So it's a day with nothing scheduled for Donald Trump after his weekend at Camp David, riddled with nonsense on Twitter, during which he attacked MSNBC, CNN, Joe Scarborough, Mika Brzezinski, California, some Republicans, Kellyanne Conway's husband, George Conway, Republican strategists, Rick Wilson, Steve Schmidt, Evan McMullen, Mitt Romney's campaign manager, whose name he doesn't know, and Jennifer Horn, while bragging about his coronavirus ratings and lying about coronavirus testing. This was just Monday. He also spent the weekend rage tweeting with all sorts of different claims, including that journalist Nicole Wallace was thrown off of The View, quote, like a dog. That is the president of the United States. Thanks to 60-something million Americans. We must act in November. So we're starting to see sort of a new divide in the fight against coronavirus. Earlier, you had these metro areas with larger population densities, more flights directly to China. You started seeing those areas have more cases pretty early. So New York City certainly at the top of that list. Boston would be another example as well. And you've got places that are less connected to the global economy having fewer cases early on. We are now starting to see a divergence where the numbers are starting to improve pretty dramatically in some of these early hotspots in terms of a reduction in cases and a reduction in deaths, and a reduction in serious cases and people in ICUs. But we have a new wave of cases in places that have been insisting all along, hey, I don't know that we need to close. We don't have any cases. And very quickly, they are getting many, many more cases. And they still seem to not understand how viral growth works. Now, let's look at one example, and that's Mississippi. Republican Governor Tate Reeves was insisting for weeks, Mississippi can open. We can open Mississippi. Everything's great here. And indeed, he decided to go ahead and open businesses. The cases spiked, and he is canceling that plan. He's calling it a pause. But okay, I mean, eventually businesses will open. The plan to open now has been canceled. Friday, Mississippi had about 400 new cases and 20 new deaths, and they have changed their plans. Governor Tate Reeves should actually be applauded for doing this. We shouldn't make fun of the fact that his initial plan was wrong. He should be praised because he's actually looking at the data and changing the plan. Because when you look at other places that have started to open, and it's still, in some cases, we don't even see the full effect yet. Places like Florida are quickly finding more and more new cases, despite still having pretty low levels of testing. Virginia is now finding close to 1,000 new cases a day. Texas is finding close to 1,000 new cases a day, and they're only testing a third or a quarter of what places like Massachusetts and Rhode Island and New York are testing. If you're only testing 14,000 people a day and you're finding 1,000 new cases a day, those numbers are going to go up even faster as you start to test more. Indiana is another place that supposedly had no problem. They were all set to go. One of the top growth rates by percentage now over the weekend. Ohio becoming a hotspot. Georgia may be the hotspot by the end of the week as Governor Kemp there has just blown the doors wide open. Georgia has nearly 30,000 cases now. I believe that if we had stayed as close to fully shut down as possible, just 2 more weeks everywhere, we would have been in a good position to have more testing by then and to be able to start easing restrictions and guidelines. But now a lot of these states are going to fall very, very far back. Here in Massachusetts, Republican Governor Charlie Baker extended the stay-at-home order. It was supposed to end today, May 4. Charlie Baker has extended it by 2 weeks to May 18th. And we've seen cases level off. We've got about a 3% new case rate per day, and it hasn't been climbing. We've seen a net decrease in hospitalizations over the last week. Deaths have dropped from close to 200 a day to about 100 a day. Still a lot, still tragic, but that's the direction you want to see things going. My instinct is that in another 14 days, if Massachusetts keeps doing this, the numbers are going to look dramatically better. The opposite seems to be happening in many southern states. Now, I want to praise Mississippi. They had a plan. We thought it was the wrong plan. Many of us did. They looked at the data and they changed the plan. We can focus on it was a bad plan to start with, and it was a bad plan to start with, but lots of states have bad plans, and many of them aren't changing the plans as the data changes. Georgia, Texas, and Florida are examples. At least Governor Tate Reeves realized the plan doesn't match the data, and we have to change our plan. Mississippi is a place with the worst healthcare in the country, according to U.S. News, 50th out of 50. They can't risk having their system overwhelmed, which would lead to a very high death rate. He changed his mind, and that's great. Let's see what happens in these other places as cases spike. Texas and Georgia, we will be following closely all week. Many states now also have armed protesters demanding that they be reopened. Protesters showing up, yelling at cops, typically not wearing face masks. Very, very ugly stuff.